I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. Well, it's my pleasure to be meeting with two of my friends, Chris Munro, John Campbell. We've been working together for a long, long time, and one of the things we've been working on is the book Growth Talk. I've had a minor part in it, but writing the foreword, but it's a great accomplishment. I love the book. I'm convinced it will be a classic coaching book, if it isn't already. And there's a lot of excitement at TLC when people heard about the book and saw it. I've got my autographed copy right here. And I want to just talk through a few of the key things in the book. There's many things we could do, but just do kind of an overview. And I'll call on each of you by name, so we go back and forth, so that we don't get all discombobulated in terms of how we share it. But I really want us to walk away with a good understanding of what the book's about. There is no coaching book like this, I don't think, that addresses the things you do. And it's so beautifully written, clear, accessible. Like, my favorite thing is something is accessible and deep. And I think you've accomplished that in a really helpful way with this book. So I'm excited to talk about it. And John, I thought I'd start with you. What's the origin story of the book? How did you get the first idea of the book, and how did it all become what it is?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks for your support of this project as well. Look, it came from, I got immersed in the whole coaching world about 25 years ago now, and as we did the work with training leaders in coaching skills, it seemed to be a whole lot of spin-off benefits to them in really fine-tuning the kind of coaching skills and coaching tools that we were using. And then simultaneously, I was starting to read some things in the leadership literature about systems and leading in systems. And these were not coaching people. They were organizational theorists and leadership theorists, and they were proposing things like it's helpful if you're leading in these systems to be really giving people a voice in the interactions they have with them. It's helpful for you to be helping make progress in these conversations and interactions you have with people. And so it seemed like there was a whole lot of stuff lining up in the organizational effectiveness, the leadership area, that was saying, well, basically, a whole lot of these things that help you be a good leader in this context are coaching kind of skills. So we started to kind of just match them together. I'm not sure we were the first people to ever do that. I don't think so. But we started to see that the work I was doing in coaching could be really combined with what was emerging in terms of what was helping leaders really work well in what they were calling complex adaptive systems. And so we started to distill the best of the coaching and say, hey, a lot of these things could be applied in other contexts that leaders are involved in every day. That was the kind of genesis of it.
I remember you and I sitting in a hotel parking lot talking about this book when it was just a kernel of an idea. And right then I was struck by what a great idea it is. And now it's real, and it's great to see that it's real. And one of the things the book convinced me of is that leading, one of the most important leadership skills, maybe the most important leadership skill, is to learn to take a coaching approach to leadership. Your subtitle is A Coaching Way of Leading in Schools. So, Chris, what does that mean, a coaching way of leading? I think it's the great strength of the book is it's not just telling people what to do to be effective, it's unleashing their potential. So what does that mean, a coaching way of leading?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I think building on what John has said, it's, and you've kind of alluded to, it's a contemporary form of leadership. One of the things we would say is it's a best fit form of leadership for contemporary schools and education organizations. In a nutshell, a coaching way of leading is essentially about how we show up and how we act, the moves we make in conversations, however brief, however informal, those conversations through which we lead, in ways that best serve the thinking and progress of our conversation partners. And my friend and colleague Jason Booton, I think you've interviewed Jason on here as well. Mm-hmm. He's in some conversations with him recently, and this is a sign of the thinking growing even since we put it on paper. he adds in the word purpose there, that we show up in ways that best support the thinking, purpose, and progress of our conversation partners. So that basic premise is every interaction that a leader has in their day-to-day, week-to-week work in a school presents the opportunity to support the learning, the progress, the thinking of the person on the other side of that conversation. And what we're seeing is when you then start to look at those conversations, they're not just the ones that are in their calendar. They're not just the formal ones where you're sitting trying to do formal coaching, or you're in a meeting that's scheduled and so on, and your team meetings and so on. It's all those other incidental conversations that either you're initiating as a leader, or often the other person's initiating. When we say more about that later. Yeah. So showing up in coach-like ways in those interactions in service of the thinking, purpose, and progress of that other person.
Thinking, purpose, and progress. So if I'm a coaching leader, I'm interacting in ways that enhance those three things. They create, see if I've got this right.
Yeah.
You're creating the opportunity for the person to think more effectively, to think deeper. You're helping them identify their purpose as they move forward. And you're helping them identify where they want to get to and monitoring their progress. Is that what you're doing? And as a leader, instead of saying, here, I've done all the thinking for you, here's what you need to do. A coaching way is really helping them think about those three things on their own: purpose, how they think, and monitoring progress. Would you say that's it? Yeah.
Absolutely, Jim. And I think the key thing there that you're hinting at is to do that well takes a level of presence and intentionality. And even the word that comes up more often now is discernment. I need to discern in that moment. You and I in that interaction as colleagues, if you're the leader, you need to discern, what does Chris really need from me right now? And sometimes I need a little bit more of you because it might be something I'm stuck with, or I'm coming to you for a particular thing. But often I have the resources within me, around me, and you're helping me move that forward. But you're helping me move that forward, not in a formal sit down, get our coaching notepad out, 1 hour or 40-minute coaching session. You might even be doing it just literally in the corridor, in the car park, on the way to a class in a few minutes. Yeah. So that's the essence of it. How have we, and John used the word distill. I like that one with the references to whiskey, but we've kind of distilled the essence of coaching skills and dispositions, and how do you bring those to bear on a much wider range of the conversations through which we lead.
I'll have to keep that in mind. Coaching as a distillery.
There's another theme there somewhere. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. So, John, I hear a lot, almost like a mantra, that leaders can't be coaches. There's coaches and there's leaders, but never the two shall mix. But obviously, that's not the way this book's constructed. That's not what the book would say. Or maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe that is a different thing. But what do you think about that idea that that leaders can't be coaches? Are there times when leaders can coach or can't coach? Or what are your thoughts about that statement?
Yeah, that's sometimes contentious, that topic. Yeah, a couple of things. Look, I think if a leader is a formal coach for someone that is a direct report, there are real potential complications with that in relation to the power differential and the reporting structures and so on that might be there. And I think that really does create some challenges. Having said that, I think in our context in Australia, there are lots and lots of schools where the resources aren't there. And if you're the principal, then you will have some expectations about coaching some people on your staff if there's only, 2 or 3 teacher school. So that's a factor. But I do think there are problems with it that are not impossible to resolve, but can create some challenges. But here, what we're talking about is more bringing a coaching approach to the way that you lead. And that's really taking it outside of the formal coaching session that Chris has made some comments on. So just to go back to one of the comments you made earlier, Jim, I think I might just give a different kind of slant to it. You said it's a coaching book. I actually think it's probably more a leadership book with a coaching emphasis or focus. There's a subtle difference there, I think. So, can leaders coach formally? Yes, but there are some caveats around that. Can they have coaching like interactions with lots of different people? Absolutely. And that's really what this is trying to bring attention to.
Yeah, the way I was thinking about it is that it's probably easier to coach in a peer-to-peer relationship, but that doesn't mean that the skills, beliefs, and practices of coaches can't be used by leaders. And in fact, I as I said before, I actually think a coaching approach to leadership is maybe the most important skill leaders can come up with, because you're all about helping people grow and improve and progress, and that's probably not going to happen if you just tell people what to do.
Yeah.
Now, Chris, you've got the concept of learning conversations in the book, and it's really a big central theme that a coaching conversation, and correct me if I don't have this quite right, but a coaching conversation is a learning conversation. And in the book, you create, we're kind of really into 2x2s after TLC, because it seemed like everybody had a 2x2.
Everybody has to have one.
Right.
Yeah.
But I want to do a 2x2 about 2x2s. But at any rate, you created a really helpful 2x2 around, you call it the learning conversation map. And so I wonder if you could explain, what it is and how it can help us do our conversations, our learning conversations.
Okay. So briefly, the learning conversations map emerged as an organizer, a framework, like all good illustrations or diagrams or frameworks do. They're kind of a framework to organize and make sense of our thinking. So as we were digging into this and trying to uncover all the different conversational contexts that we were thinking about when we talked about bringing a coaching approach, we started to see these different areas where leaders, depending on their role, and when we say leaders, we mean anyone in any kind of position of influence or responsibility. That could even be, unofficial, peer to peer, where they have the potential to support the thinking and progress of that person, to hold a learning conversation, or it's a moment where you can have a learning conversation. And it started with a horizontal continuum. It's another thing we seem to love in our organizations, isn't it? And we love our continua and our 2x2s. And that horizontal one was about the range of stances or level of management and input that the conversation leader might have. So in the example you gave earlier, Jim, at the left-hand end, there was, and you're showing up in a way that really is all about me and all about my resources and all about my thinking. And I've maybe even initiated the conversation with you. I've said, have you got a minute, Jim? It's really led by me and what I want from the conversation and my resources. So it's very much partner-led, yeah, and not a lot of you in the conversation. At the other end, there might be times when you need to initiate or have more of an input in the conversation. That still doesn't mean telling. It just means there's more of your thinking in it. It's more like what we would call a dialogical approach in instructional coaching, where we're thinking together. So we saw this range, this continuum of types of conversation. Way at the far right-hand end, if I'm a leader, and it's not on the map, it's outside because it wouldn't necessarily be a learning conversation, are those times when a leader has to have a really clear, unambiguous, we'd probably say directive conversation. It's not on the map with a direct report, because something's gone wrong, or there's a compliance issue or a duty of care issue. Those are not learning conversations. They don't start there. So the ones we are talking about are the ones that in that moment present the opportunity to support learning. And some need more of my leadership, some need less of my leadership. But then as we expanded that, we realized that some of those are in very formal settings and some are in very informal settings, and there's a range in between. So we ended up with a vertical axis, which is another continuum of formal at the top, informal at the bottom. And what that gave us, of course, were 4 quadrants. Now, the caveat around this, as you know, Jim, very well, as soon as we put something static on paper as a diagram, it looks like 4 buckets or 4 silos that you say, that one goes there, that one goes there. The key point about the learning conversations map is to remember that there are degrees of formality and degrees of my leadership or input in that conversation. But what it started to become is a helpful way of making sense of the opportunities that present themselves to leaders to lead learning conversations. One summary way that we sometimes get people to think about this, and we do this in workshops, is to think about if any of us, the 3 of us are leaders in different ways, we go back through our calendar for the last month. So I go back to my Outlook calendar and I write down all of the conversations I had in my role that were not in my calendar. And if I was working, I work remotely, but if I was working in a building, it might be even more. It still happens. So those incidental conversations in the corridor, those ones where you say to me, Jim, Chris, can we have a quick chat tomorrow to check in on that project? Those are not scheduled, formal, sit down, agenda, minuted, but there are hundreds of those through any given week, month, year. And what we're saying here is the map helps you identify places where you can lead those conversations more intentionally and make the most of them as learning opportunities. And leaders spend way less time in the formal partner-led conversations, which is where formal coaching sits, but they tend to spend much more time in the bottom half of the map, which are other initiated conversations. So you saying to me, Chris, have you got a minute? Either as if I'm your line manager, or me coming to you as your line manager saying, can we have a check-in on this? Or I'd like to share something I noticed at the meeting last night with you. Conversations that keep progress going and keep momentum going in an organization like a school. And so as a heat map, we almost see, way more of those conversations in that bottom half, the less formal conversational contexts.
I like a couple things. Well, I like a lot of what you said, but two things stood out for me. That idea of opportunities, what the learning conversation map says. It could be an informal conversation. It could be a formal conversation. It could be one where I'm really purely facilitative. It could be one where it's more dialogical.
Definitely.
That's the first thing that struck me. It's saying there are all these contexts, but then you said the context is dynamic. It's not I'm either in this box or in that box. I could see where I might start with very less of me if I'm coaching, where I say, I think I need to be more clear on what are some possibilities here. I need to share more. And it could be in the midst of the conversation, it could move along that continuum.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And the way we describe that is your stance can shift during the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's great.
And
It's a great example.
that's where your discernment comes in.
Exactly. There you go. Yeah.
So the book's called Growth Talk, John. So that's the first thing I learned about Growth Coaching International was the growth framework. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the history and then just sort of give us a quick overview of what the growth framework is. So, where did it come from and what's it look like?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Jim. Look, Growth Talk gives a nod to the fact that we think every kind of interaction can have a growth component to it, I guess. And it also kind of makes an allusion to the growth framework, which has been fairly central to our work at GCI over the years. And the growth conversational framework is just that, a map, an outline for how you might structure a more formal coaching conversation, and it's variation that was developed by early business partner Mandy O'Brien way back in the 90s, early 2000s, and it just extended and reworked some of the things that had been in one of the original John Whitmore Grow model that was out there at the time. And it basically just starts with a little bit ahead of that too. It really talks about relationships and trust as being important before you even get started. So that's a little extra bit. The G is for goals and where you want to get to. Starts up front with that. What's the outcome? What are you really wanting to see that's different? The R is for reality. Where are we starting from now? And we also emphasize the resources word too, as a way of touching into what's already working here that might be something you could draw on. O is for options and possibilities and starting to expand out what might be possibilities in terms of going forward. T is for tactics in this framework, which is just the very specifics about next steps to try and just get people to take some tiny steps forward in a very short time following the conversation to create momentum. And H is for, oops, I left out one. W is for will. After the options is what will you do? So it gets to that point where we're really kind of pushing some pressure onto making an action happen from this, not just an extended discussion. So that's where the W fits in. Techniques is then, as I mentioned, the specific next steps. And H is to remind us that we want to get some habits, some sustainability into how these new actions might continue and not just see them as a one-off. And at the very end of the whole GROWTH, we have a celebrate success thing, which is a reminder to acknowledge progress, because out of that, it comes the commitment to keep going and the energy to keep going. So that's the growth framework in short. We actually use a kind of shorter version of it within this framework, because we're talking about those quick interactions. And so there's a slightly truncated version we suggest that we use in these briefer conversations.
I found the framework really helpful, and I've been learning about it from the two of you for, I don't know, many years now, maybe a decade. And when I was first, when we developed the impact cycle over time, but then I found myself in more facilitative kind of conversational situations. And without the structure, I don't think it was that productive. I kind of wasted people's time. And then once I learned growth, not that I was like, okay, we've got a G, where's the R, where's the O? I just had those things as a way to go. But initially, I really wrestled with reality and goals. I said, how do you know what your goal is unless you know where reality is?
Mm.
But a few months ago, I interviewed Richard Boyatzis on his book, The Science of Change. And he said, the starting point of change is for people to get a clear vision of what they want to accomplish, their positive goal they want to strive for. And that's really changed my thinking. I think you don't start with reality, you start with the positive vision. This is where I want to get to. And then you say, okay, where am I now? And what are resources are around to help me move a little bit closer to my goal? And so having that positive vision up front has been really powerful. And then I really have found the rest of the structure really powerful. I think the GROW model, leaving out tactics, isn't what I would work for me, because I found that tactics part where people pin down, when are you going to start? What are you going to do? What's the next step? Let's break it down. That's critical. If people don't, and they don't really, it's not really a pleasant conversation. I mean, it's not painful, but it's some hard thinking to put it. But if you don't do that thinking part, I don't think it's ever going to happen. And then the habits part is really, what do we have to remove to make it happen? And how can we make this something that's habitual? Are there ways we can make this more routine for you? All those kind of things. But to me, as I've learned more and more about growth, it's become more and more powerful for me when I do coaching, because of the vision, because of the reality, because of the options, the way forward, or what will you do, and so forth. So I'm grateful for the process, but it's probably not going to work if I'm just telling the person, here's what your goal is, here's what reality is,
Mhm.
here's what your options are.
Mm.
It's a coaching conversation, and coaching involves skills. And so one of your really outstanding chapters in the book talks about coaching skills. Do you want to share a bit about that, Chris? What you put
So
there?
thank you, Jim, and I love the way you've structured the shape of this, because you were bringing shape to this conversation. The other way I would describe that growth framework, and the way we describe it as this kind of subtitle of that chapter, is bringing shape to conversations. What you've just described is, some people would say rigor, but it actually brings some kind of shape, gives you a set of signposts to help you navigate and bring that structure or rigor to the conversation. So if that's what shapes it, the other question we had is, so what fuels the conversation?
Hmm.
And the things that fuel the conversation are how I deploy the coaching skills. Now, you and I know, John, that there's, every coaching manual you pick up anywhere in the world, anybody's written, will have a certain set of core skills in it. There's variations in the way they're presented. We think that one of the most elegant kind of summaries of coaching skills is, of course, our friend and colleague Christian van Nieuwburg's 4 key coaching skills. So we've started there as a basis. Now, there'll be no coaching manual anywhere in the world that doesn't have something about questioning and something about listening, and something probably about paraphrasing and summarizing. So there are the first 3. But even then, asking powerful questions, not just any old question. And sometimes leaders default sets of questions. Lots of why questions, for example, and problem-focused questions aren't as helpful as some of the ones that direct people more towards what you said, the vision of what they want to see is better. So we spend some time thinking about what makes a question powerful and intentional. As John said, especially a really incisive question at that particular moment in the corridor where you don't have time to ramble around. Listening, and the way Christian describes it in his introduction to coaching skills, is listening to encourage thinking. And I think there's a really important addition there, that we're listening in ways, and they're hearing their thinking back in ways that encourage them to think more deeply, even in the moment. So we took those kind of core skills, paraphrasing and summarizing, We quote our wonderful colleague Lucy Carroll in there in the book. She's delighted. She's got a little mention in there, and I met her at TLC because she once described to me in a meeting like this that she reckoned that paraphrasing and summarizing was the sleeper skill of the coaching skills, because someone asked as a participant said, what's the most important of the skills? They always want a definitive thing like that. What's the most important skill? And her view was actually paraphrasing and summarizing was the most undersold one. And often in those in the moment conversations, it is just reflecting back. So what you seem to want is, so it sounds like it's about this, rather than another question. And they'll jump in and keep thinking and moving forward on that. So really important one. And then a real contribution that Christian has made in that space is the idea of noticing as a skill. And I think to what he and Robert Biswas-Diener have now written in Radical Listening about your intention determining your attention, that's such a powerful thing, and it's related to noticing. So showing up in ways that you're really attentive and you're noticing what's going on for you and for the other person and even around you in these informal settings. But then the one that we've introduced in the leadership space is sharing knowledge and perspective. Because it's not enough to say I'm a leader or I'm an instructional coach or I'm a whatever. I come with expertise. Of course, we all do as experienced educators. We bring something to the conversation. We reckon it's a skill to know how and when it's appropriate to deploy some of that, or you might even say to unleash some of my know-how. So in that section on that as a skill, it's not about what you know, it's about how you utilize what you know and bring to that conversation in ways that support the thinking and progress of the other person without, as you've said, telling them what to do. So it's subtly different from I'm going to give you my advice and I'm going to tell you what I think. It's more like that dialogic space, but it's a real skill, especially for leaders, because they're so, it's so ingrained often that they learn how to manage that advice giving tendency and develop that use of what they bring to the table as a skill. Yeah. And we position all of those as ways of fueling the conversation or driving the conversation.
There's a couple thoughts I've got about it. I loved how you described the skills, and maybe this is just where I am right now. After TLC, but I feel that the coaching skills are more than coaching skills. They're really like life skills. If you ask better questions, you'll have better conversations. If you have better conversations, you'll have a better life. If you are more present and you notice things more carefully, you pay attention, you're going to have richer experiences. If you listen attentively, you're going to build emotional connection, and paraphrasing and summarizing is going to accomplish that too. And if probably the explaining one is more professional directed, but still you're going to be more effective if you explain things. But the questioning, the listening, the noticing, the paraphrasing, the summarizing, those aren't to me just coaching skills. They're life skills. And if I'm better at questioning, I'm better at listening, I'm going to have better conversations, a better life. The other thing, I'll just follow up with one more question for you, Chris, is that as I read the book, I thought this is not just a book for leaders. If I'm an instructional coach, if I'm whatever my role of coaching, it's helpful to all. It is a leadership book, as you said, John, but I could see anybody benefiting from the book. Is that your take?
Yeah, definitely. We agreed. At one point we were thinking, can we just talk about becoming an effective conversation leader? Our main audience and our main field testing and need that we saw was people who are in designated leadership positions in an education setting. But we actually finish in the final chapter with a provocative question. It might not be provocative. We think it is. What if everyone in a school community became a more effective conversation leader? And that term, conversation leader, conversation partner, emerged out of a very practical thing. Can you imagine us writing this saying coach/coachee, coach, mentor, mentee, all the way through the book? We realized we're actually talking about someone leading the conversation, managing it, shaping it, supporting the other person, and someone as the partner or partners in a team setting. So we expand it out in the final chapter, but you're absolutely right. This is the examples and contexts are leadership contexts, but they apply to everyone. And I suppose that's the argument as to why these conversations are culture shaping in an organization. If we're all better at this, it shapes culture.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely true. John, go ahead.
Yeah, just a thought on the skills, I think, Jim, that as you're listening to you guys talk, it's they are life skills. And yet they have a subtle nuance in the coaching context. For instance, Chris talked about listening is not so much gathering information. We're not trying to find out, to diagnose in a way. We're trying to give people a chance to do their thinking and to provide an opportunity for that to happen. And so the listening is really to encourage thinking as it's articulated there. And so I think actually if you're learning them in a coaching context, they can go back into a general life context and be better because you've fine-tuned them for the coaching context, if that makes any sense. Because sometimes you say, just ask questions and it's, well, tell me about, or whatever. And yet we say, okay, no, there's a powerful way of asking questions that actually is, again, not just for seeking information. It's actually to help people progress in their thinking, to stay focused on positive aspects and to move things forward. That subtlety of the way they work in a coaching context, when people get them in that way, they take them back into family situations, parenting situations, and they will be better communicators, even though everyone starts with a certain level of these listening, questioning, so on skills, because we just use them all the time. Not sure if that's made a lot of sense, but
No, it does.
hmm.
I think that's absolutely true. And one of the things I love about the book is it lays out pretty specifically here a bunch of different skills you can use in different situations. And another one of my favorite parts of the book is the just a minute conversation. And that gets back to the conversational, the learning conversation map. That there are different kinds of coaching. It doesn't have to be, let's talk about your goal, what's reality, let's work through the framework. I might only have 3 minutes. Somebody comes to me and says, hey, I gotta have some help here. Have you got a minute? And then you take it off. So what's the just a minute conversation? What's that look like?
Yeah, well, in some ways, you've kind of summarized it by what you just said, and the name is very descriptive of what it is. Although usually people are wanting more than just 60 seconds, but it is one where they've initiated it, and it's an informal context. It might be in a corridor, it might be, out in a car park or in a playground, and so on. And we actually, the big message from this, I think, is these shorter interactions, and they're usually maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes or something, can be quite transformative. So that's not to say everyone is going to be, but if there's a sense of getting intentional and skilled about these opportunities, these smaller interactions can be, which typically make up a lot of our day, can be quite significant. And that's the sort of key message. So we don't think that, we think with just some sense of shaping these, some sense of how you might conceive of these conversations, some sense of refining the skills for these shorter interactions, you can make a really big difference. And that's a key message in the whole book. So got a message would be, got a minute would be something that I might want to run past you about, something I'm deciding about, thinking about. I just would like some sounding board feedback, some chance of hearing myself talk about it for a while that would bring a level of clarity and energy that I can take forward with an action. So a good part of the book is given to that particular context. And so we think that's a pretty important part of what we're talking about.
So what's the framework? There's like 3 parts of the conversation where what's wanted here. What's the
That's
rest?
that's just kind of shorthand for what we might sort of be trying to do to help people get clear on what's wanted. Often people are very clear about what they don't want about a situation that they might be in, and they can talk forever about that. We want to shift to what is you want to see happening here instead. Secondly, we want to tap into whatever resources there are that might be hidden beneath the problem and try and tease out what might be some things that they can build on to go forward. Almost always there are some, sometimes quite a lot. And we want to draw attention to those. And the third thing is what's next. We do want to get to some movement here. So, but not huge, long lists of things to do, just 1 or 2 things that might happen in the immediate future to create a sense of progress and move it forward. Because one of the things that really did emerge was that the sense of progress was a really significant factor that leaders could help happen in the interactions they're in that would really build motivation and energy in really helpful ways.
It seems to me, as a leader, you almost have to rewire your brain away from, oh, you've got a problem, let me tell you how to fix it. And having those simple little frameworks, what's wanted here, what are resources that exist, what's next, those little frameworks that give you an easy way to remember, oh no, this is not for me to tell you what to do. This is a chance for me to unleash your potential. So that's what I don't think they're trivial at all. I think they really help you. They give you a structure for rewiring your brain. Chris, you look like you've got something you want to
Do
say.
you know, it was just, I'd go even further and say as a human, not as a leader.
Yeah.
We all have that in us. We all have that in us. A friend, a family member tells you something that they're struggling with. Our first reaction is to tell them what we think, or to listen in ways that we start to think about solutions and so on, and then we offer that unsolicited advice. The advice, as Michael Bungay-Stanier says, your advice monster climbs up on your shoulder and says, I can add value here. I've got something. What's it would stop talking, and we've all got that ingrained in us as humans in our society. So I actually think leaders have a head start because you're already an educator. You've got fairly well-tuned communication skills. You wouldn't be a successful educator otherwise. This is about tuning them further to pay attention to particular things.
Chris, I wanted to ask you a question because you've told me a few times that English was not your favorite class, and you really didn't see yourself as a writer. And now what you've done is you've written what truly is an extremely well-written book. It's easy to follow, without being superficial, and it's packed with useful things, but it's also kind of inspiring. So, so I was wondering, a lot of people I talk to are thinking about writing a book, or they have a book they want to do. Even within our own team, I was talking to people yesterday about this. Oh, I don't think I can write a book. So what advice do you have if someone's listening in and they're thinking, oh, I don't know if I should write a book? What advice do you have for new writers who are a little nervous about putting the words out there in public?
Here you are after we've talked about advice giving, inviting me to give advice. So I'm a bit wary of that. I think, yes, thank you for those kind words. High school English was something that was torture to me. I had to get through it in order to get the grade I needed to get to uni. In Scotland, your higher English qualification at high school is the essential thing for any course you want to do further than that. So I had to stick with it right through the 6th year in high school. It's like year 12. And I was a slow reader. For whatever reason, I was one of those middle kids that just got hidden in the midst of everything, and that's not, I understand the struggle of my teachers. It's not a blame thing. It's not a chip on my shoulder either. I'm quite proud of where I've ended up. But gradually, actually in my adult professional life, as I learned about coaching, John, that's where you first met me, when I started writing some stuff in a blog about what I was doing in the school. And I think the advice from me, Jim, and it's not really advice, it's what drives me in it, is it's a thinking space. It's getting all those ideas that whir around your head when you're deeply immersed in a field or a topic that you're passionate about, and you get the great privilege that we get of working with so many practitioners and helping them make sense of it and follow the journey that you've gone down in your learning. I found that as a really useful way of crystallizing my thoughts. And it started with blogging. And then I got some really positive feedback on blogging and some papers I would write in the school and so on. And that made me realize that people were saying, oh, this actually makes sense. This is resonating. And see your ideas in writing resonate with someone else was a completely new experience for me. So that gave me the confidence. And I've got loads of lovely friends in the coaching kind of circles, Deborah Netolitsky, John Andrews, Andrea Stringer in the past, who encouraged me to blog and put stuff on Twitter and all that stuff, where you put your voice out there and you see that it actually resonates. So I suppose that is a piece of advice: is start small and write something, share your thinking, and see how it lands. And that starts to fuel it, because you go, and it crystallizes again. It's almost like a written dialogue. But I think in terms of the writing process, it's a bit rich, given it's taken us, what, John, 3 years, 4 years, 3 years probably my involvement, but it was a couple before that with you at least. I think if I was doing another one, 2 key things. One is some kind of routine or discipline. I used to joke because you lock yourself away in your cabin. Christian van Nuremberg said to me once, none of us have got the luxury of being full-time writers. You need to fit it in the gaps. So you need to make gaps and make the discipline to do that. I think the next one, that is something I'll set out with a plan at the start. And the other piece of advice that really rang true with me, and it came from you, it came from John, it came from Christian. That's another piece of advice: get some experienced writers beside you as well. Was you don't have to pour everything into this book, Chris. because it was the first one, and because a lot of these concepts were things I had been thinking with and wrestling with and making sense of for years. There's a temptation to pour everything you've ever thought into the one book. And I remember Christian saying to me, there's a danger you make this look too hard. If you pour all of your learning and thinking into this one thing, you actually make it sound more complex than it actually is for the reader. You need to think about your audience and what you're trying to share here. And some of that other stuff will be in another book, or it's just background that you've got to let them get to on their own, kind of thing. So there was some really, really useful advice in there from you three, because you're experienced writers and authors. But yeah, those will stick with me as I go into what you tell me there's going to be a next one. So I've already got a folder that says the sequel, and I think I know what it's going to be on. Yeah, thank you.
Very cool. Very cool. It's very interesting. It's very interesting about human potential. How when I was starting out, when I wrote my very first article, I was like, man, I wrote an article. Like now I don't know how many books, quite a few books, but at the very first thing, I just felt, wow, that's really a big step just to get one thing out there, one little research article. So it's very interesting. Do you want to add anything to this, John, about the advice for writers from two authors who are talking the whole time about not giving advice?
Yeah. Look, one thing that occurred to me was, again, a bit of advice from Christian actually was, the whole thing about perfection and wanting to be perfect, and realizing that even once you've written this, there'll be things you want to change about it as soon as it's published. So kind of coming to terms with that, because holding on to the perfection thing and making sure you want to get it absolutely right in every respect is really quite paralyzing. But if you can let go of that a bit, I think that helps get the momentum going, and that's what's really important in writing, I think.
Well, that's a very good point. And yeah, that's very good. Anything else you'd like to say about the book? Anything else that either one of you would like to share?
No, I think we said a lot. Maybe just one comment is I think, we've always had a high value on wanting to make things immediately useful to people. So you can dip into this. You don't have to read the whole thing. And there's a bit of conceptual stuff that leads up to where the practical stuff really kicks in. We think that's helpful, but ultimately, I think we've generally tried to write something that school leaders or others in leadership roles can use on a daily basis and keep coming back to referring and refining it. So practical value was a real important priority for us.
Definitely. And I think, Jim, that's one of the ironic benefits that's come out of it taking so long for us to finalize it, because in that time we've been field testing the frameworks and concepts. So as we've crystallized the learning conversations map, for example, we've presented it with leaders at conferences and things and tested. So because of the strung out writing process, we can say these are field tested. Some of them were already, but some of the new frameworks and organizers in there, we've actually tested and refined over that time as well. So maybe that's a good thing as well. Yeah.
It's more distilling. That's what you're saying, Chris.
More distilling. It's percolated. I love these. We love good metaphors in coaching, don't we? Yeah.
Well, it's a great book. It's a great accomplishment. You should feel proud. I'm really, really impressed and grateful to have a tiny part in the whole process. And I just encourage people to look it up and use it. Thank you both. I thought this conversation was great. I'm really grateful to both of you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you.